For the last 12 months or so, I've been working on trying to cultivate a little bit of a meditation practice. And so I've been thinking about, naturally, I've been thinking about the way meditation appears or doesn't appear in the literature that I've read or the literature that I'm reading. And so I sort of try to rack my brain to think, what are examples of meditation, the experience of meditation, the practice of meditation that appear in literature that I've read. And I wanted to cast like a totally wide net, and I really struggled to find much, to find many examples. So I did manage to come up with four examples, which I'll share with you. But I do want to pose the question to you, if you have any ideas, any examples that I might have missed, works of fiction that sort of explore this theme. So please let me know in the comments. So the first example that I thought of, and some of these are a bit of a stretch, but it's really all I could think of, is a character in Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, the character of Dunbar. So this is a character who spends a lot of time lying on his back, just staring at the ceiling, and he's doing it because he's trying to cultivate boredom. He's trying to be as bored as possible. And the reason he's trying to be as bored as possible is because he's trying to extend his life. He finds that life is going by so quickly. And so this is sort of spelled out clearly at one point early on in the book. It's the quote, Dunbar, that's his name, Dunbar loved shooting skeet because he hated every minute of it, and the time passed so slowly. He figured out that a single hour in the skeet shooting range with people like Havermeyer and Appleby could be worth as much as 11 times 17 years. And then the scene continues where Clevenger is yelling at him, telling him this is like the stupidest thing I ever heard. And eventually Dunbar responds to Clevenger. He says, "Do you know how long a year takes when it's going away?" Dunbar repeated to Clevenger. "This long," he snapped his fingers. "A second ago you were stepping into college with your lungs full of fresh air. Today you're an old man." And they sort of go on, he goes on in that vein. And so there's a bit of an element of satire, I think, in the character of Dunbar. It seems like Joseph Heller is like sort of satirizing the practice of meditation as if it's like this desire to make life seem longer. And of course, Dunbar's methodology here is a little bit ridiculous, as other characters in the book note. He's a little bit crazy, and I think the main reason why Dunbar is crazy is because it's hard to imagine this actually working. I mean, even if you can slow down the experience of time in the moment, let's say, which I think you can do by doing something very unpleasant or very boring, there's still a sense where when you look back on time always feels like it's gone, like it's slipped through your fingers. So it's hard to see how, beyond making the present moment feel very unpleasant, Dunbar is really successful. But at the same time, I think there is something profound. He's trying to explore the felt presence of immediate experience. He's trying to explore what is the content of awareness at any given moment. What is the experience of time passing? How can you slow down time? How can you try to zero in, focus in on the texture of a particular moment and be aware of its passing? To take every moment so seriously that you feel like it's worth paying attention to. It's not worth just slipping by, like if a sense that life is short and that nothing is more important perhaps than paying attention to these moments that are slipping by us. The argument might be that it's sometimes important to pay attention to the felt presence of immediate experience, but for another person who's an even deeper meditator, the argument could be that nothing is more important than the felt presence of immediate experience, that everything in life is just distraction. Every thought, every memory, every anxiety, every Netflix episode, every tweet that happens on social media, they're just distractions. And what's important in life? Experiencing consciousness, experiencing what it means to be a conscious being in this world. And the other argument that I think I found is that by seeing clearly what's in the content of awareness, by being present with awareness, you have a certain mastery over your experience. And so where naturally human beings like myself are reactive, where we feel strong emotions and strong negative emotions, and they sort of affect the way we operate in the world. A person who's capable of being more mindful is able to see more clearly these emotions as they arise and have more of a mastery over them, for example. The second example that I found is a book that my son read before me, or a story that my son read before me, and I read after him, the wonderful story of Henry Sugar, and other short stories by Roald Dahl. So the story that I'm interested in, that I'm thinking of, is the wonderful story of Henry Sugar. So in this story, we have like this British guy who comes across this manuscript, this like a medical case study of this doctor who worked with this patient who was able to see with his eyes closed. And he was able to see with his eyes closed because he was like this very deep and mystical or mystically evolved yogi who had studied meditation for many years. And so this doctor wrote this case study of like how this yogi, this individual, how he's able to achieve this, power and have this power. And the doctor thought, we can cultivate this skill and help blind people see, and then the yogi dies before the doctor is able to really make it useful to other people. But Henry Sugar, who's the protagonist of the story, he finds this manuscript and he realizes that, wow, I can follow this program of developing a meditation skill, a meditation practice, and I can try to cultivate this magical power of being able to see through things on my own. So he, buckles down, Henry Sugar, and he applies himself, and he, starts taking out a stopwatch, and he's staring at a candle, right? So he's focusing his attention on a candle, and he's saying, how long can I focus on the candle before my mind wanders, before my attention breaks, my focus breaks? And he starts off, he can only do 10 seconds, and he builds his duration, as if he's like a sprinter trying to, get better and better at his sport or something like that. And eventually he is able to do it for hours on end, and eventually he attains the magical power of being able to see through things, and then he becomes a gambler and makes tons of money from the casinos because he can see through cards. So that's a wonderful story of Henry Sugar, and he gives all his money to orphanages around the world. Beautiful story. And again, it feels very satirical. It's like, seems to be making fun of like this Eastern idea about meditation, which can give you like all these magical powers. And it's like a funny marriage on the one hand of like this idea of meditation from Eastern spirituality, this like this practice of focusing attention, and this like Western obsession with like duration and like accomplishment and money and profiting off of this skill. So it's like this funny Roald Dahl satire marriage going on. But of course, I think people who do cultivate the experience, the practice of attention, who do make the effort to practice focusing, I think they would say, in many cases at least, that it is a kind of power. It is a very powerful skill. Obviously it's not a magical power, obviously, but it's a useful tool. And the practice of sitting with a stopwatch, which is something that I do basically, and so that I think is just obviously valuable. My third example is, of course, Moby Dick. And over this past year that I've been meditating, I've totally rethought how I read Moby Dick. I now think that a major, critical, central theme in the book of Moby Dick is meditation. The book starts with Ishmael having a major crisis, a major spiritual crisis. He's basically suicidal, we're told. And he decides to go whaling, to go on this whaling voyage, multi-year whaling voyage. And in the book, it's set up as a kind of retreat, a kind of escape from his life, to find a kind of peace and a kind of distance. And he does find, indeed, a kind of redemption in this experience. There are great scenes of Ishmael on the boat, great chapters where he describes looking out on the ocean from the crow's nest of the ship and just falling into a deep meditative trance, taking in the experience of that vastness of space. And the story of Moby Dick is a story of a deep connection, deep friendship between Ishmael and Queequeg. Queequeg is this South Islander, black tattooed. He's called a cannibal by Ishmael and other characters in the book. And Ishmael and Queequeg become bonded. They forge this friendship. And Queequeg is this pagan who worships this idol, this little idol, Yojo. And there's a great scene in the beginning of the book when they become close friends, and Ishmael's trying to see Queequeg in his like hotel room where he's staying, and the door's locked. and they can't get in. And he thinks that maybe Queequeg had a heart attack and died. And Ishmael's in a panic, and he gets the innkeeper, and they have to like break down the door. And Ishmael is sitting in meditation. He's having Queequeg is sitting in meditation. He's having what Ishmael calls a Ramadan. So I think maybe 24 hours or whatever it is, where he's not eating, not talking. He's just sitting in silent, perfect meditation. And so Ishmael's like, okay, he's fine. We'll leave him alone. We'll let him meditate. And afterwards, Ishmael's like, listen, man, you should not be doing this. This is not good for you. And it's a very, very comedic scene. But again, it gets to the fact that this theme of meditation, because Queequeg is such a central character of the book. He's such a noble character. He's such an evolved character. He meets his own death later in the book with total equanimity. He builds his own coffin and lies down in it. And he's an example of real health, of psychological health, of spiritual health. And he, of course, is a deep meditator. But the one scene from Moby Dick that I think is so powerful and so unique and speaks to this theme is very early on. It's the scene when Ishmael wakes up in the Spatter Inn, in the same bed as Queequeg, and he feels Queequeg's arm over him. And he says the language that he uses is that I found Queequeg's arm thrown over me in the most loving and affectionate manner. You had almost thought I had been his wife. And so he wakes up in this bed, and he describes the most like incredible sensation, this like indescribable sensation that overcomes his body in this embrace of Queequeg. And he says there was one other time in his life that he felt this sensation. And I'll read that little aside that Ishmael gives us here. He says, quote, "My sensations were strange. Let me try to explain them. When I was a child, I well remember a somewhat similar circumstance that befell me. Whether it was a reality or a dream, I never could entirely settle. The circumstance was this. I had been cutting up some caper or other. I think it was trying to crawl up the chimney, as I had seen a little sweep do a few days previous, and my stepmother, who somehow or other was all the time whipping me or sending me to bed supperless, my mother dragged me by my legs out of the chimney and packed me off to bed, though it was only 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 21st of June, the longest day in the year in our hemisphere. I felt dreadfully, but there was no help for it, so upstairs I went to my little room in the 3rd floor, undressed myself as slowly as possible so as to kill time, and with a bitter sigh got between the sheets. I lay there, dismally calculating that 16 entire hours must elapse before I could hope for a resurrection. 16 hours in bed. The small of my back ached to think of it. And it was so light, too, the sun shining. And he goes on. And he describes this experience. And in the end, he has like this apparition. He feels a strong sense of a presence in the room. And there's different philosophies of meditation. One of them that we mentioned before is this idea of meditation is about cultivating focus. But there's other ways of thinking about meditation. There's ideas of letting go of thoughts, letting go of grasping. It's about introspecting in a certain way, observing what comes up. But another philosophy of meditation is that it's just sitting. It's nothing. There's no science to it. There's no technique to it. You just sit. And for me, a part of meditation is like sitting and trying to get to the other side of boredom. It's about being bored and getting through boredom so that we have a different relationship with boredom and with ourselves and with the world. The sense of like recalibrating some internal barometer. And that seems to be what happened to Ishmael a little bit in that scene where he has to sit through this intense boredom. He has no choice. And there's something that changes in him. It's like this durational activity that Ishmael goes through, and he comes out changed. Whereas similar to this whaling voyage, it's this long durational activity that you go through, and you come out recalibrated internally. It's like you get through something difficult. You get through boredom so that you experience the world differently. And the hope, I think, in myself at least, is that if I can get through boredom, I can get to the other end of boredom, then the world just feels more okay. It just feels more correct. It feels more reasonable than it would otherwise. The last example that I have here is from the story The Zahir by Jorge Luis Borges. The short story The Zaheer tells the story of Borges, who comes in contact with an object. And this is like a sort of a this object has a sort of a magical power in the sense that it arrests a person's attention. So whoever finds this object now becomes totally fixated and focused on this object. And of course, this is like the inverse of a meditation, right? So if the Henry Sugar meditation, for example, is you're focusing on the candle flame, you cultivate the focus. This is where that focus is being cultivated whether you want it or not. So Borges comes into contact with the Zahir, which is a coin, and all his upset attention is now getting focused on this coin. And he's describing to us in this short story at the very end, at this point, that his life is about to be completely unraveled. Because the Zahir demands so much attention that he will no longer be even able to function as a human being. And so Borges describes, he says, "Before the year 1948, Julia's fate will have overtaken me. I will have to be fed and dressed. I will not know whether it's morning or night. I will not know who the man Borges was. Calling that future terrible is a fallacy, since none of the future circumstances will in any way affect me. One might as well call terrible the pain of an anesthetized patient whose skull is being trepanned. I will no longer perceive the universe. I will perceive the Zahir." Idealist doctrine has it that the verbs to live and to dream are at every point synonymous. For me, thousands upon thousands of appearances will pass into one. A complex dream will pass into a simple one. Others will dream that I am mad, while I dream of the Zahir. And he continues on in that way. He ends by drawing an analogy to the Sufis who repeat their own name or the 99 names of God until the names mean nothing anymore, which of course is an example of a kind of meditation. And he says, "I long to travel that path." And so, yeah, one of the interesting things about meditation, which is hard to explain, hard to put in words, and I struggle now to try to articulate it, is when you can cultivate focus and you can fall into a state of focus like that, it's sort of a strange experience. It's an unexpected experience because you can lose your sense of identity, right? We sort of inhabit the world with a very clear sense of who we are and who the world is. And that comes from data that we sort of piece together about what we look like and what our appendages look like and how we interface with the world. But what happens when all your attention is on your breath? What happens when you have an itch or some pain and all your attention is on your pain? And what I mean by all your attention is that there's no more space. There's no space for memory. There's no space for imagination. There's no space for ideas, for concepts, even subtle concepts. All of a sudden, there's no space for a sense of self. There's no space. You realize that sense of self is actually just a concept, and as a concept, it can be dismissed temporarily. It can be ignored temporarily. Like Borges just becomes the Zahir, so to speak, the awareness of the Zahir. That's all he is. So that's it. Those are my 4 examples. I'd be curious to hear what you think. If you can think of any examples. Thanks for watching.